The Black Rose McQueen. I wanted to give a shout out to Ring IQ Boxing, and remember to tune in to the motherfucking relay.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, you guys out there, you might have heard about this already the last week or so. That's 2 weeks that, like most every other thing anywhere around the world.
Everywhere.
The anti-doping agencies that work in unison with the powers that be to keep boxing a clean sport, like the sport itself, they also have come to a screeching halt. This is due to the COVID pandemic, of course, that their primary function at this time is not needed since the sport itself has come to a screeching halt. Thus, all of its moving parts must also come to a screeching halt. And this comes as a surprise to no one. I mean, this was expected. This was implied. But these anti-doping agencies, some of them, they so decided to publicly announce that they were going to dial back the testing that they normally do. And we touched on it on a couple of live streams right here on the channel and on Unrivaled Boxing Talk's channel on his live stream earlier this week. We talked about how, that they're dialing back testing really isn't an issue. I mean, everybody's got to take a back seat to this global pandemic. Most everyone and everything. That the normal day-to-day activities that we all engage in are suspended. And that was expected. That was implied. Thus, a public service announcement wasn't necessary. And if anything, it was counterintuitive, as these agencies rely on the element of surprise.
They do.
Standardized, randomized testing is only as effective as these agencies' abilities to catch these guys with their pants down. But when you tell these guys that you're dialing it back a bit, you are effectively showing your cards. You are effectively giving these guys the green light to do whatever the fuck they want, because you're telling them you're not going to be performing your normal functions. And while there might have been those out there who expected as much and deduced it, there might have been those out there who maybe they didn't put 2 and 2 together. Thus, they were on their P's and Q's in the event that the anti-doping agencies are still conducting tests. Essentially, an announcement wasn't necessary because that element of ambiguity, not knowing, still services as a deterrent. But when you tell everybody, well, we're not going to be testing right now, it becomes a fucking free-for-all for anyone to use anything in the mean in between time while the anti-doping agencies are suspended. I mean, that's what it is. That's what you effectively give them the green light to do when you announce to them that you're not going to be testing anybody. I mean, I don't know why they did it. It seemed pretty fucking boneheaded. You've already got entire governments around the world informing all their citizens to stay inside. Thus, the suspension of certain activities is already implied in the absence of any public announcements. So why an anti-doping agency that relies on the element of surprise would take it upon themselves to,
I don't know,
inform the same athletes that they are intended to police, inform the same athletes they're intended to test? Why they take it upon themselves to tell those athletes we're not going to be doing nothing for a while, it really is beyond me. I mean, whose fucking idea was that? You didn't have to tell them that shit. Should be able to put 2 and 2 together, and if they can't, at minimum, the benefit of that is that's less guys using less shit. Common sense argument, really, but this is yet another instance where common sense really isn't all that common.
It isn't.
Don't be surprised if when boxing resumes, you start to see a lot of career best performances, That's just something to think about. That's just something to look out for. In other news, Jaime Munguia had this to say. He says he was training for Islam, and he's in no rush for Canelo or Golovkin. He's quoted as saying, "I train daily to correct mistakes. Learn something every day. From the last fight we saw that after throwing a combination, I was coming forward too much and lowering my hands. So we're working on that," said Munguia, who added that he will also run, but in the afternoons, because there are less people on the street. Munguia made it clear that if they offered him a fight against Canelo Alvarez or Gennady Golovkin, he would gladly accept it, although he warned that he's not in a hurry. "I want to face the best. There's been a lot of talk about Golovkin or Canelo, but there's been nothing concrete. It does not depend on me, but on the promoters. I'm not in a hurry. Everything will happen in due time, when it has to happen. And if it doesn't happen immediately, it helps me to have more learning and development fights." The former world champion said that originally he was scheduled to fight on May 2nd in the co-feature of the evening for the super middleweight fight between Canelo and Billy Joe Saunders. Munguia was going to face Kanat Islam, an undefeated Kazakh who is based in California and is a bronze medalist at the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Now, we just have to wait to see when and against whom we will fight. For now, we will continue training calmly, correcting mistakes, and getting ahead. I want to be a world champion at 160 pounds too, and with whoever I have to fight, I will. But that does not depend on me, but on my promoters. I do not have a preference of who to fight, and if I have to travel to Japan or some other country, we will. As we all know, Jaime Munguia, former WBO junior middleweight champion Jaime Munguia, has since made his ascent to the middleweight division, and his maiden voyage to the division started off with a fight against Spike O'Sullivan. If not for the global pandemic, Jaime would have seen himself fighting Kanat Islam. Kanat Islam, who has a professional record of 27 wins and 21 knockouts, no losses. All things considered, a pretty good scalp for anyone to collect, provided that they can collect it. Kanat Islam was last in action against Walter Countundukwa. That's the same Walter Countundukwa that Demetrius Andrade locked horns with for what was then the vacant WBO title. And no U.S. broadcasters picked up Kanat's fight with Walter, so you might have missed this one. The story seems to be that Kanat Islam, he didn't look his best in that fight. Better still, it would have been a nice scalp for Jaime to pick up, provided he could pick it up. It seems that his ascent voyage through the middleweight division is off to a more interesting start than his reign as WBO champion in the junior middleweight division. The politics of boxing saw him so isolated from the rest of the weight class that even though he defended his title a couple of times, it really wasn't against anyone all that interesting, all that relevant to the division, whereas here in the middleweight division, he's got a larger pool of options that are not so affected by the politics of boxing. In the middleweight division, Jaime Munguia is obviously on the same side of the street as a Canelo Alvarez, as they both fight under the same promotional banner, Golden Boy Promotions. There's that, yeah, but he's also on the same side of the street as a Gennady Golovkin, as a Demetrius Andrade, and the pool of options isn't limited to just what DAZN has to offer and what outfits have network ties to DAZN, Matchroom, Golden Boy. The pool of options at middleweight is a lot more broad than it was for Jaime in the junior middleweight division, because the middleweight division is not governed, ruled, and dictated by just one promotional outfit the way that 154 is. At 154, PBC controls most of the action, the PBC. They've got most of the belts, they've got most of the contenders, and it being that the PBC doesn't have the relationship with Golden Boy.
They don't.
That Golden Boy has with either Matchroom or Top Rank Boxing, well, a lot of fights aren't going to happen. A lot of fights weren't going to happen for Jaime. Not that they wanted those fights for him.
They didn't.
Not at that time anyway, not when Jaime had the belt. He was only 21 years old when he won it. It became very clear, very quickly, that he was being brought along slowly, even though he was a reigning world champion. Better still, he's 2 years older now. He's in the middleweight division, and he's got a wider variety of options in the middleweight division than what he had access to in the junior middleweight division. I reiterate, he's on the same side of the street as Canelo. He's on the same side of the street as Gennady Golovkin and Demetrius Andrade, more or less. But the other network relationships are also there. Golden Boy worked with Top Rank to make the Vasyl Lomachenko versus Jorge Linares fight. That relationship is established. That relationship is there. And that is the kind of relationship that could see Jaime fighting the likes of a Rob Brandt. That is a relationship that could see Jaime fighting the likes of a Ryota Murata. You will notice that Jaime Munguia touched on potentially taking a flight out there to Japan, and if you're in the middleweight division and you're going to Japan, in all likelihood, it's to fight that guy. It's to fight Ryota Murata. That is a fight that is made possible due to the network relationships and the landscape of the middleweight division. You know, a few weeks back, we talked about how the PBC severed ties with Lou DiBella as a result of Lou orchestrating that meeting between DAZN's John Skipper and Deontay Wilder. And the relevance of that is that Lou DiBella's got his own stable of fighters, and one of those fighters happens to campaign in the middleweight division. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Sergey Derevianchenko. I'm talking about the same Sergey Derevianchenko that made Golovkin look the worst he's ever looked. This is yet another viable option for a Jaime Munguia, because Lou isn't in bed with the PBC anymore, but he still has fighters, and he still has to get fights for those fighters. Those fighters, like Sergey Derevyanchenko. I wouldn't mind seeing a Derevyanchenko versus Munguia middleweight contest. The takeaway here is that although Jaime Munguia's reign at 154 wasn't the most eventful, wasn't the most exciting, maybe it was stifled by the politics of boxing, or maybe it was as a result of them guiding him along slowly.
Could have been both.
Perhaps it was. But here in the middleweight division, he doesn't have that crutch. He doesn't have that excuse, those excuses to lean on. There's no reason that Jaime Munguia's campaign in the middleweight division shouldn't consist of exciting fights with exciting fighters, as the obstacles that were there at 154 are not here at 160. In layman's terms, the training wheels have got to come off, and they've got to come off now. That when boxing resumes, Jaime Munguia has little to no excuse to not take on the elite fighters in the middleweight division, of which there are no shortage of. It can't all just be about Canelo and Golovkin. There is also Demetrius Andrade. There is also Rob Brandt, Sergey Derevyanchenko, Ryota Murata. Pick your poison.
Pick one.
Jaime had 5 title defenses of the WBO title at 154 pounds, and the most solid opponent he faced was Liam Smith. Liam Smith's a solid fighter.
He is.
But if that's the best guy you fought, your body of work, well, it's kind of thin. 35 professional contests, 5 of those contests being world title defenses, and the most interesting guy you fought really was Liam Smith. I have to say, it's time for Jaime to step it up. No excuses. The training wheels have got to come off. Let's see if they do once boxing resumes. In other news, up-and-coming welterweight prospect Vergil Ortiz had this to say. He says, I want to beat Errol Spence in his prime by 2022. A portion of the article reads, last year, Spence was sitting ringside supporting Ortiz during his homecoming fight and a win over Antonio Orozco. Both fighters grew up together in the same gym, and Ortiz said that he envisions a super fight with his friend once he's a bit more seasoned and fighting at 154 pounds. I'm actually pretty happy that he showed up for the fight. It means a lot to me. He used to be my teammate, and he's a great fighter, Ortiz told BoxingScene.com after his win over Orozco last August. I want to be a 4-division champion. I just want to be remembered. They'll say that Vergil Ortiz is probably the best prospect that nobody is talking about. I don't feel that this fighter is getting the same push as a Ryan Garcia or some other young up-and-comers that are out there. Names that get thrown around more often than Vergil Ortiz. I think the reason for this is the politics of boxing, the division that Vergil campaigns in. Vergil Ortiz fights under the Golden Boy Promotions banner, but it just so happens that it's the PBC that dominates most of the action in the welterweight division. Thus, these politics might be stifling what opportunities are out there for Vergil. That it's kind of hard to get this guy in line for big fights when the big fights with the big fighters are on the opposing side of the street, and the people on the opposing side of the street, they're not too keen on fighting fighters that are with other outfits.
They're not.
Not unless it is absolutely necessary, and even in those situations, they may not give a guy the time of day. I mean, think about it for a second. If unifying world titles with Terrence Crawford in a fight that the fans are actually asking for, if unifying world titles isn't that much of a priority to Spence and the people at the PBC, then why would fighting Vergil Ortiz be a priority to those same people? It wouldn't.
Not now, at least.
I will say that Vergil's timeline for these events to come to pass, 2022 at 154 pounds, that sounds realistic, that sounds grounded, based in reality. Because by that time, I sincerely doubt Errol Spence is still going to be able to make 147 pounds and make it healthy.
Not in 2022.
But the same applies, doesn't it? The PBC have a stronghold at 154, the same way they have a stronghold at 147. And short of Vergil Ortiz crossing over to their side of things, it's hard to imagine that he'd get a fight with any of their fighters. Their fighters aren't in any hurry to fight a guy that actually has a belt. So why the fuck would they be in a hurry to fight a guy that doesn't have a belt? Whether it's at 147 or 154. Whether it's here and now or 2 years down the line.
Same fucking shit.
Think about how this island policy has affected the career and the momentum of Terrence Crawford. Not being able to get certain fights with certain fighters has slowed his momentum, his buzz. Think about the adverse effects of that on Crawford's career, and then apply that same logic to Vergil Ortiz, who isn't a world champion like Terrence Crawford. He's still got things to prove. He's still got to make his bones. He's just a prospect. And think about how this island policy also would affect Vergil at either 147 or 154. In truth, Vergil Ortiz would be better off reshifting his focus and setting his sights on Terrence Crawford instead of worrying about Errol Spence. Because unless you're going to go over to the PBC side of things and enter some kind of multi-fight commitment with them, you're probably not going to get that fight. I'll tell you what they got to do for Virgil. Forget about the PBC. Forget about the PBC's fighters. You know what you do for this kid? You put this kid in there with the Ray Robinson. The same Ray Robinson that made Josh Kelly look bad. The same Ray Robinson that made Igis Gavaliauskas look bad. You put him in there with that guy, and maybe Virgil has a sensational performance. Maybe he stops that guy where they didn't stop that guy. You build him up. You build him up and have him fight. And Igis Gavaliauskas thereafter, Golden Boy, Top Rank. They got a good working relationship. They can make it happen. You build him up. You have him fight a Ray Robinson, then an Igis Gavaliauskas, and ultimately build him up to fighting Terrence Crawford. Those two guys, they need each other at this point because the PBC kids are happy to ignore them and freeze them out. So they've got to make do with who's willing and who's available. This is what needs to happen for Virgil at the tail end of 2020 going into 2021 because, focusing on Spence, naming that guy, the only thing that's going to come of that is you're going to have a lot of YouTubers accusing Virgil of clout chasing Errol Spence. Now, I'll tell you, it's not clout chasing when you actually want the fight, when you're trying to line yourself up for it. It's not clout chasing when you actually want to beat the guy, as that is the name of the game. That is your job. That if he's king of the hill, it's your job to knock him off.
That's not clout chasing.
Clout chasing, as it were, comes to the sport of boxing, is more along the lines of using a guy's name to get yourself notoriety, get yourself attention, without having any real intention of fighting him. The best example of this is Luis Ortiz using the name of Anthony Joshua, that this guy talked all that fucking shit, so that when they finally made you an offer, you fucked it up.
You did.
You rejected it. You don't tell the guy that you're ready, willing, and able to stand in as a substitute for any amount of money so that you can turn around and turn down $5-6 million or whatever the fuck it was. That's clout chasing, folks. Whereas Virgil wanting a fight with Errol Spence, no, that's run of the mill. That's normal. That's what's supposed to happen.
That's the name of the game.
That if you're an up-and-coming prospect and you want to prove that you're one of the best fighters in the world, you have to do it by taking on the best fighters in the world. And if anybody out there classifies Errol Spence as one of those fighters, then Virgil calling him out and wanting to fight him somewhere down the line, that shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't, although things are seldom ideal in the sport of boxing. Virgil would sooner have more success trying to pin down Terrence Crawford than he would trying to pin down Errol Spence. Those are the facts. And that's what I think he needs to do.